Okay, we'll go ahead and get started then. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our meeting of the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District for the proposed amendments to Rules 4401, 4409, 4455, 4623, and 4624, which are our rules for leak detection and repair. The meeting is being held in person and telecast between our Fresno, Modesto, and Bakersfield offices and via Zoom. My name is Emily Nealand, and I'm the program manager for our air quality planning team here at the district. And I'm joined by Patrick Houlihan, supervising air quality specialist on our planning team, Luis Aguilera Orozco, air quality specialist, Aaron Scott, permit services manager, and Jennifer Lettergerber, air quality compliance manager. We will do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with participation in person and via Zoom. Before we begin, here are some important guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. Please silence your other communication devices, such as your cell phone. During the meeting, all public participants on Zoom will be placed on mute by the host. Public members will not be able to mute or unmute manually. If you'd like to provide public comment during the comment period of this workshop, please step up to the podium to signify that you wish to speak or raise your hand on Zoom. Audio for members of the public will be unmuted once they are recognized to make a public comment. You can also submit comments or questions to our webcast email, which is webcast@valleyair.org. And you can also use the Q&A function on Zoom, which will be addressed after the verbal public comment period. If you are presenting or providing a public comment, please state your name and affiliation and speak slowly to allow for smooth translation. At this time, our translators will share instructions on how to access the translation services. And with that, can we bring up the presentation really quickly and switch to slide 2? You can go ahead and stop sharing on your side, and we'll get started with the translation instructions while you pull that up.
We got it.
Go ahead and switch to slide 2.
Okay.
Thank you.
There we go.
Muy buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidos a esta reunión. A través de esta reunión del día de hoy vamos a tener interpretación simultánea disponible. Para seleccionar la interpretación simultánea, si usted está en una computadora, a favor de seleccionar el icono que apareció un mundo abajo de su pantalla. Después de seleccionar el icono que apareció un mundo, usted va a seleccionar su opción de lenguaje, en este caso será español. Después de seleccionar español, favor de silenciar el audio original para que de esta manera no escuche ningún eco. Le invitamos a someter cualquier pregunta o comentario en su lenguaje de preferencia. Si usted está utilizando otro tipo de diapositivo como una tableta o un celular para escuchar esta reunión, usted va a seleccionar los 3 puntitos que indican más o more. Después de seleccionar ya sea más o more, usted va a deslizar un poco hacia arriba y va a seleccionar interpretación de lenguaje. Después selecciona español y por último no olvide finalizar o poner done para que de esta manera se active la función. This meeting will be conducted with simultaneous interpretation throughout the meeting. If you are a monolingual English-only speaker, we also invite you to select interpretation. In this case, if you are on a computer, you will select the world-like icon at the bottom of the screen. After selecting the world-like icon, you will select your language preference. In this case, it will be English, and this will leave you ready to just fully participate and engage in the meeting. If we do have any Spanish comments or questions, you will be able to hear the translation or interpretation of the questions in real time. If you are using a tablet or a cell phone, your options will be a little bit different to access interpretation. You will actually select the 3 dots that indicate more. After selecting more, you're going to slide upward and on manage language and then just select English and you will be ready to go. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I guess we'll go ahead and begin. Once again, my name is Patrick Houlihan, supervising here with our Plans and Rules Department.
Really quickly, I don't think we have the presentation pulled up.
IT has asked us to share the table. Which would you rather share?
You could put up the presentation. Thank you.
Okay. All right. All right. So given the many national air quality standards that the district must attain, we have long adopted and implemented stringent control measures, otherwise known as rules and regulations. In
Hey,
conjunction with
Patrick,
our,
really quickly, we're having trouble with the presentation actually showing up on Zoom, so we're going to share it on our side from the central region.
okay, so you'll click through the slides then? Or advance them?
Yes.
That will work. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead and get started, Patrick. Sorry.
Okay, I was on slide 3. You want to advance to slide 3? There we go. All right, so I'll start again. So given the many national air quality standards that the district must attain, we have long adopted and implemented stringent control measures, otherwise known as our rules and regulations. In conjunction with our rules, new sources are subjected to backed analysis, best available control technology, if that's required to get further reductions. Existing stationary sources have also been subject to best available retrofit control technology, or BART. You'll hear these acronyms throughout the presentation. Since the 1980s, as standards become stricter and technologies evolve, the district continues ongoing research to demonstrate that the district rules continue to meet state and federal requirements. Next slide, please. AB 617 was adopted in 2017 and required an expedited BART review of our existing rules, and also set an implementation schedule for the LDAR suite of rules. That deadline is at the end of this year. BART is an air emission limit for existing sources, and is the maximum degree of reduction achievable, taking into account environmental, energy, and economic impacts. Part of the definition of BART is that a district should consider rules that have been successfully implemented elsewhere. And then the district also can further consider going beyond what has already been accomplished by evaluating new technologies and innovative approaches that may offer potential emissions reductions. Based on that BART analysis, the district is proposing more stringent LDAR requirements, and that will be presented later in the workshop. I did want to point out, you also see in another slide that there will be no new VOC technologies being proposed. Next slide, please. Okay, so we were rolling along with the BART requirements, and then came the EPA, and issued the TSD, the Technical Support Document, for the CTG, the Control Techniques Guidelines, that they had released. The CTG has rack level reasonably available or reasonably achievable control technology. There's a lot of acronyms there. The CTG has rack level guidance that non-attainment areas throughout the United States have to consider. RACT is the lowest emission limitation that a particular source is capable of meeting by the application of control technology that is reasonably available considering technological and economic feasibility. The CTG specifically cited deficiency in our rules 4401 and 4623, which again we'll present shortly on those deficiencies and how to address them. Next slide, please. So we're going to go over a quick review of the rules before we get into the changes. So 4401 is to limit the VOC emissions from steam-enhanced oil production. I want to point out that it already has an LDAR program and it already requires VOC control. Next slide, please. Rule 44.9 is to limit VOC emissions from light oil production as well as natural gas plants. Those are the most common here. It does entail, it does have applicability to some other sources as well, but those are the most common ones here in our district. 44.9 also has a LDAR program with it. Next slide, please. Rule 4455, again, for our district, is to limit VOC emissions from leaking components at refineries and gas liquid processing facilities. It too already has a LDAR program. Next slide, please. Rule 4623 is to limit VOC emissions from the storage of organic liquids. It requires leak detection, but it does not have leak repair timeframes, unless, of course, you are enrolled in the voluntary tank I&M inspection program. And it does require a VOC depending on your situation, your scenario. Next slide, please. And Rule 4624 limits VOC emissions during transfer of organic liquids. And it too already has a LDAR program, and it does require VOC control depending on the situation. And next slide, please. So this slide shows the various VOC control technologies employed for the three rules that I mentioned that have vapor recovery requirements: 4623, 4624, and 4401. As previously mentioned and addressed here in that last bullet, the control technology requirements are not being amended. So with that, I will turn over to Luis Aguilera Orozco to go over the amendments that we're proposing.
Thank you, Patrick. As previously proposed, the proposed amendments are primarily stemming from the BART analysis, which is the driving force and influence for the proposed changes. We will now discuss starting with Rule 4401. If you can please move to the next slide. So the district is proposing a reduction in the minor leak threshold definition from 2,000 parts per million to 500 parts per million. Additionally, the current leak threshold for pressure relief devices under 4401 will remain at 400 parts per million. We're also proposing an increase in operator inspections from annually to quarterly. The rule will now allow the use of optical gas imaging, also known as OGI, as a screening tool, but not as a method to replace EPA Method 21. The district is also proposing the removal of exemption 4.6.4 from Rule 4401. This removal will require stainless steel tube fitting to conduct quarterly inspections as well as meeting the leak standard proposed in this full proposal. We're also proposing the removal of exemption 4.7, components exclusively handling gas vapor liquid with VOC content of 10% by weight or less. Currently, these components are exempt from conducting leak inspections, but are subject to the leak standard. Next slide, please. We're proposing a reduction in the repair period from 14 days for minor leaks down to 5 days. The reduction will make Rule 4401 consistent with the proposed changes to the current state regulation and other federal requirements. We're also proposing a reduction from repair periods for minor leaks as well, or for major leaks as well, sorry. The district is proposing an extension in repair time, and it may be granted for a rig up operation should a repair extension be required. The draft rule goes into further detail on the specifications needed to qualify for this extension, like providing proof of the delay of repair. Finally, for 4401, the district made updates and added new definitions to provide clarity and to provide consistency across all of the LDAR rules. Next slide, please. So for 4409, the district is proposing to apply a reduction in the minor leak threshold from 1,000 parts per million to 500 parts per million. The current leak threshold for pressure relief devices under 4409 will remain at 200 parts per million as it is now in the rule. The district is also proposing quarterly inspections, but in the case of 4409, operators will not have the possibility to transition to an annual inspection. The district is also proposing to add the same extension of repair for rig up operations should a delay be required for obtaining a rig in a rig up operation. The proposed rule will also allow to use OGI as a screening tool as mentioned previously, but not as a replacement to EPA Method 21. Similar to 4401, the district also updated some definitions and added new ones for clarity and standardization across the other rules. The district is also proposing, sorry, what slide am I in? 14.
44.
Sorry.
Hang on.
Next slide, please. Sorry, couldn't catch the screen there. So for slide 15, the district is also proposing modification to exemption 4.2.6 and 4.2.7 by removing components handling VOC content of less than 10% by weight for gas vapor only. They're proposing a reduction in the repair period from 14 days to 5 for minor leaks and a reduction for major leaks as well. Like I mentioned previously, we're also implementing new definitions or making updates to existing definitions to provide clarity and standardization across other LDAR rules. Next slide, please. For Rule 4455, the district is also proposing a reduction to the minor leak threshold for pumps, compressors, and other components under 4455 from 1,000 to 500 parts per million. The majority of the components under 4455 are already at 500 ppm. So the reduction to these specific components will bring them down to that level. The district is also proposing quarterly inspections, but similar to 4409, operators will not have the possibility to transition to an annual inspection. The district is also proposing modification to exemption 4.2.8, the section exempting stainless steel tube fittings for the rule requirements here under 4455. As mentioned for Rule 4401 and 4409, we're also allowing the use of OGI or optical gas imaging as a screening tool, but not as a method to replace EPA Method 21 during inspections. Lastly, the district is proposing changes to some definitions, as mentioned previously for other rules, to provide standardization and clarity across all of their LDAR rules. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we move to Rule 4623. The current rule doesn't have a minor leak threshold as of right now, and we're proposing to establish a minor leak threshold starting at 500 ppm. We're proposing an allowable number of leaks for minor leak thresholds at 2% of components inspected. However, these components are still required to comply with the leak repair timeframes proposed in the rule. The district is proposing a quarterly LDAR inspection for all components subject to the rule as well. We're also proposing an update to the voluntary preventative inspection and maintenance tank interior cleaning program. The proposal is to make the program applicable to floating roof tanks only. However, the fixed roof tanks will still be required to comply with the tank cleaning provisions of the program. Similar to the proposed rules, we're also proposing OGI as a method of a screening tool, but not as a method to replace EPA Method 21. We're also proposing to drop the true vapor pressure exemption from 0.5 to 0.1 psi, which will subject tanks to the requirements of Rule 4623. Next slide, please. To comply with the CTG deficiencies found in the TSC published in May of last year, the district has added language to address tanks used in crude and natural gas production operations for the potential to emit of 6 tons of VOC per year or greater. These tanks require control systems of 95% or greater if their actual emissions exceed or are equal to 4 tons of VOC per year. Lastly, the district is proposing, as similar to other rules, to update, provide new definitions to keep consistency across all the other LDAR rules and provide more clarity. Next slide, please. Rule 4624. Similar to 4623, the district is proposing to establish a minor leak threshold starting at 500 parts per million. We're proposing an allowable leaks for minor leak thresholds at 2% of components inspected, and similar to 4623, they're still required to comply with the leak repair timeframes. The district is proposing a quarterly LDAR inspection and repair for all components subject to Rule 4624, and the use of OGI as a screener tool only. And finally, the district is also proposing to add new definitions and update current ones to provide clarity and consistency across all other LDAR rules. Next slide, please. So up above, you'll see a graph of the proposed amendments. The district has determined of a reduction of 278.5 tons of VOC for all proposed rules together. The graph does illustrate a breakdown of tons reduced per rule for the proposal. Next slide, please. So the compliance dates for these proposed amendments will start effectively on July 1st of 2024. And should a vapor recovery system be needed for Rule 4623, an authority to construct will need to be submitted by January 1st of 2024. Sorry, I may have misspoke. July 1st of 2024, sorry. Oh, yeah, December 31st, after December 31st of 2023, or 2024, sorry. An authority to construct will be required to be submitted to the district by December 31st of this year. Slide, please. So next steps, on top of the comments provided today, we're also taking written comments during the comment period, which will continue up to May 1st of this year. We plan to post our cost effectiveness and social economic analysis and other supporting documents in the coming weeks. Next, we'll also publish our rules for the proposed rules by May 16th, 2023, to provide for a 30-day publication and comment period, where we will ultimately take it to our governing board by June 15th of 2023. Next slide, please. So up above, you'll see my contact information. I'm Luis Aguilera Orozco. My phone number is there, as well as my email, should you have any questions. And if you want to submit any comments during the comment period. If you have not signed up for a listserv, we're also taking signups for that as well through our webcast, and you can get updates for any new postings or notifications for our rules. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, we will now open it up to comments and any questions.
Yeah, if you could go back, Luis, to that last slide. If you have comments coming up in the next few days, weeks, send it to the air quality planning at valleyair.org or to Luis. And then for today's workshop, if you want to go to the next, advance to the next slide, please. Today's workshop, if you want to send it to webcast@valleyair.org right now. And with that, we're going to start taking public comments. Oh.
Okay, great. Thanks, Patrick and Luis. Just really quickly wanted to remind everyone, if you are in person in our Bakersfield office, You can step up to the podium if you'd like to speak. And then once we conclude the in-person public comments, we will switch to Zoom verbal comments, and then we will switch to any comments in the Q&A or the webcast@valleyair.org email. Do we have any public comments in the Bakersfield office?
Yes, just 1 minute.
Hi, I'm Julie Means. I'm with California Resources Corporation. My question is about overlapping LDAR with CARB and the COGR regulation, and with the removal of the exemption, how is that going to affect our reporting? Are we going to have, where does that leave CARB LDAR? Are we going to have components that are subject to both 4409 and the methane rule?
Yes, you will. Yeah. Anything that's in our rule is not COGR. Anything COGR is.
But right now, the COGR regulations exempt if they're already under district rule. And so with the removal of this exemption, we will now have to do duplicate reporting.
I think maybe Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't that just be them now subject to district rule, not COGR?
Yeah, that's our belief would be. Yeah, it would just be subject to us now, not COGR.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jill.
Emily, we have another gentleman. 1 moment.
Lance Erickson, I'm with Chevron. So many questions. I think going over 5 or 6 rules in 20 minutes has my head spinning because I'm not sure which ones are which. But until we see draft language, a lot of the questions won't come to fruition. I do have a couple of general.
Just really quick, I'm sorry to interrupt you. So we do have draft language of the rules posted on our website. So, and I'm sorry that we didn't have it available earlier, but, you know, obviously you'll have time to review it and provide more comments, but we do have it out. Okay.
I looked for it last week. I couldn't find it, so that's fine. Thank you. Appreciate that it's out there now. The one thing that was said several times, and I didn't quite understand it, says OGI is allowed for screening, but doesn't replace method 21. What is OGI allowed for screening mean if it doesn't do you any good? I mean, I can go out there today and do OGI on components. And so what was this addition to the rule provide a benefit? How does that provide a benefit?
We'd leave it up to the operator, but it's just a best management practice if you want to use that to pre-screen for leaks or as you're going along with your method 21. As you know, the district employees, there are FLIR cameras out there too, so.
Yeah, that's a whole nother subject. The one question I had, and I know this is consistent with the draft state rule for methane, on the 5-day repair period, 14 to 5 days is a big drop. And I know at least some of the rules, there was allowance for an extension. I didn't hear that mentioned in all the rules, but I'm going to assume that's allowed. We could certainly, and I believe the CTG requires, the EPA CTG requires a 5-day first attempt at repair, which makes perfect sense because you can usually repair components. Many components can be repaired to below the leak thresholds with just minor adjustments or minor maintenance that can be done quite quickly. However, there are other components that, and the majority of them, 5 days is pretty tight if you actually have to get a crew out to actually work on that. So I'd like you to reconsider that. I believe that's a comment that oil industry has made to the state as well, that the 5 days to make a repair is a really tight time frame. And I guess the last thing I'll bring up is the 4623 applicability. You mentioned that the voluntary, something about the voluntary only being allowed for floating roof tanks. So I'm, what changes, I guess, in 4623 regarding the requirements to do LDAR on tanks that might or might not be subject to, that are subject to the rule, and two that aren't subject to the rule?
Just so I understand your question correctly, you're asking about the change for the voluntary tank inspection program, how it affects current existing tanks?
Well, under 4623, my understanding is currently that if you do the LDAR inspections voluntarily, you're allowed to do tank cleaning without a variance under the memo or the voluntary program rules allowed by the rule.
That's still remaining, but since we had to incorporate an LDAR portion into the rule, we had to take it away from the voluntary tank inspection portion of it.
So if you are subject to the rule, you have to do LDAR on your components. Correct. If you're not a floating roof tank.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. That's what I thought that's what I thought the conclusion was, but I couldn't quite get that because my mind doesn't catch up with those things quite that fast. Okay. Thank you. I'm sure we'll have additional comments as the review the rule.
Sure. Thank you, Lance.
Do we have further comments?
Emily, we have no further comment in the South.
Okay, we will switch to Zoom. The first commenter I see is Scott Falkenberg. Scott, you should be allowed to unmute.
I am. It keeps flicking back and forth between unmute and mute. Did I get it?
Yeah, we can hear you, Scott.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. One question I have is we still haven't addressed the vapor recovery components. So a lot of heavy oil tanks still have vapor recovery on them. And that's not subject to 4401 or 4409. Does that mean you guys are going to keep them under COGR with completely separate leak rates and then still have the confusion between what's vapor recovery, what's tank, the same issues we've had before? It sounds like that issue has not been addressed. And then also adding to that, we have a lot of leak programs or LDAR with the 2201 conditions defined as 2201. And are those going to be moved over to 4623 or 4401, et cetera? Or are we still going to have to be subject to doing 2201 leak LDAR as well as COGR LDAR? And just as Julie said, this is another instance of having to report in two separate places. Because we'd have to report under 2201 for the district, not report, but inspect. So we'd have two different leak thresholds to inspect under. And then the next one is, and I didn't get this because I haven't seen the rule language, but you're removing the TVP, or you're requiring TVP testing every 24 months now for every tank, or what does that mean? And that's section 6.23 under the second slide on proposed amendments to 4623.
Yeah, Scott. So to address the CTG deficiency, the CTG requires that tanks do testing to show that they're either, if they're above 6 tons of VOC potential to emit, that they either, approach the district, get an ATC, put on vapor recovery, or if they're above that, they can also, come in and show that their actual emissions are less than 4 tons, and then they would not have to put vapor recovery on.
This isn't telling me that I have to TVP test my vapor recovery tanks. Is that correct?
Yes, there will be a requirement to do TVP testing to check out to determine your potential to emit for your tanks.
Okay, even for controlled tanks? Because we've never had to do that before.
Scott,
Yeah,
I can answer that question. So if your tank is already complying with emissions control by 95% or greater, you're already meeting the recommendations from the CTG. So to answer that question, if you need to test that tank that is under vapor recovery, if you're already testing it with a 95% efficiency control, then it doesn't require you to do so based on the 2016 CTG.
Okay, thank you. I haven't seen the wording for that, and I just want to make sure that's still there. I don't want to start testing vapor recovery tanks. And then also, this is the first I've heard about the lowering the TVP to 0.1 from 0.5. And really the biggest impact on this is going to be all the little guys. Is there still going to be a little guy exemption?
Yes, the 50 barrels per day, the 50 barrels per day to exempt from the rule still stands.
Okay. And then, well, that's it for now. Yeah.
The exemption for 50 barrels per day is still in the rule. That's not being changed or amended.
Okay. So all my tanks that are my little producers that do not currently have permits, I'm not going to have to get permits for all these little tanks.
That is correct.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. That's it.
All right. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks.
Next on Zoom, we have Valerie Mueller. Valerie, you should be prompted to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, this is Valerie with Crimson Pipeline. And we had submitted a letter some time ago regarding Rule 4623 in regards to tank seal repair times. There's most other rules and also in many other air districts, there's a certain time frame where an operator is allowed to make repairs to faulty equipment. So for example, if there's a torn seal, that he gets 3 days to repair it. Right now, as it stands, the moment you discover that there's a torn seal, it's a violation. And that issue has not been addressed at all in this rule. So I was wondering if the air district is not planning to incorporate that.
Valerie, this time we do not plan on incorporating that. We do have your letter and we've read it. Because 4623 did not have that in there prior, it would be considered backsliding to put that in there.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Thank you, Valerie.
Thanks, Valerie. Scott Falkenberg, I see you still have your hand raised. Did you have additional comments that you'd like to provide?
Always, but not right now.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
So I did not see any additional hands raised on Zoom, and I'm going to quickly double check our webcast@valleyair.org email. I don't see any specific comments in there. And the Q&A, we've addressed all of the questions already. So with that, I will have one last call for public comment in person or on Zoom.
Hi, Emily. We will have one more here in the south. One moment.
Okay, thanks.
On the 4623.
Hold on a second, sorry.
Like on 4623, I understand what was said, that an ATC application, if you need to have a vapor control system installed, an ATC application needs to be turned in by December 31st of this year. And the system, and you have to have the system installed and be in compliance by the first of 2025 or the end of 2024. There's and that's a very tight time frame to get between now, that's about maybe 18 months to get a system designed, an ATC in place, and then actually install that. So I would like to consider, at least with the ATC part of it, we certainly would turn it in as soon as possible, but no later than the 23rd. But the time frame for installing it probably should be at least 1 year from the date the ATC is issued. because there's a if the ATC was issued on the 31st of this year, then we got a pretty good shot at getting it done in a year. If it's not issued for several months after that, the time frame gets very tight. So I'd like that, some consideration on getting the system, allowance for getting the system installed once it's approved.
Okay, thank you, Lance.
Okay, I did not see any, sorry, Marlene, no additional comments in the Bakersfield office?
No.
Okay, perfect, thank you. And I don't see any additional public comment on Zoom or through the Q&A or the webcast email. So with that, I'd just like to remind you guys, if you would like to submit written public comment, you can do so by submitting those to airqualityplanning@valleyair.org or to Luis via the contact information that was provided in the presentation. And you can find a copy of the presentation on the district's website in both English and Spanish on our upcoming public workshops page. With that, we will go ahead and conclude the public workshop, and we thank you again for your time this afternoon.